Changemakers, what's up? Welcome to the Change Chats podcast. I'm your host, Tiesha, and here we're all about addressing various topics in life because we can't change what we won't confront. So let's talk about it. Here we are with season 1, episode 1, and I'm ready for some fire. I hope y'all are ready too. This episode is entitled Just Do It. It's going to be so good, y'all. It's going to be amazing. So buckle up your seatbelts because we are in for a treat and a ride. Before we go any further, I want to shout out my sponsors. We have some amazing material. These printouts, you see the label here for Change Chats. That is all credited to Beautifully Mended, which is a women's empowerment organization all about helping women to identify as their true selves, walk in their callings, and live their God-given purposes. So thank you to Beautifully Mended for sponsoring our material. I also want to shout out One Time Productions, a production company, all things audio, for providing us with our amazing microphone, and the soundtrack that you heard when this video started is credited to One Time Pro. Thank you so much to our sponsors. Now listen, I said that this episode is talking about just do it, and just like Nike, that's exactly what we're going to do. But before we dive deep into today's topic, I want you to put in your mind what you believe your calling is, or what you believe is something that is associated with your calling. And I want you to carry that with you throughout the rest of this episode as we dive into it. So just do it. How did I get here? How did I get to Change Chats, episode 1 of season 1? Just do it. So I just told you to take your thing that is attached to your calling, or what you believe your calling is, put it in your mind and carry it with you throughout this episode. So many of us in life confuse what our calling is with what our purpose is. And as I was preparing for this episode, God was just speaking to me and really giving me revelation about what it means to be called. And so first and foremost, what it means to be called is to be called into Him. So called out of darkness and into His light, to know Him more, and thus getting to know ourselves more. That is what it means to be called by God. To be called by God means He is calling us closer to Himself. He is the author, the creator of our lives. And so He's calling us to know Him fully and truly, because so many of us are living our lives not knowing who God is, thus not knowing who we really are. So when I talk about the calling, that's the first part of the calling. When we're called by God to know Him better and to know ourselves better. And then from there are certain giftings, certain things that God allows for us to do. So He calls us, and then He chooses us to operate in a certain way for the purpose of bringing people closer to Him. So a lot of us are like, I don't know my purpose. I don't know what my purpose is in life. And I think that our definition of purpose just is a little bit skewed, because our purpose in life is always to bring people closer to God, to shine a light for people to see God. When they see us, they should be seeing Him. They should look at us and then see God to the point that they want to know more about God, want to know who is this God that we serve. So that is our purpose, to draw all men near to God. Our calling is for us ourselves to be closer to God, and our purpose is to bring others closer to God. So I wanted to lay that foundation, but to also say that as we are answering the call, God will cause us to operate in a certain flow and to do a certain thing, right? And that is how we fulfill His purpose for our lives. So if it be that you're an artist, if you are an entrepreneur, if you are a writer, a speaker, a doctor, a lawyer, whatever it is, a parent, that is often, as God calls us, He gives us the ability to operate in the flow, in the function of what I just mentioned. So we're called to God, and then He chooses us to show up in the world in various ways. And however we're showing up in the world is for the purpose of bringing people closer to God and edifying the kingdom of God. So when I think about how I got here, how I got to this very moment today, I think about when God called me over 11 years ago. I was about 19, I think almost 20 years old when God called me. I had not grown up in the church, didn't really have a relationship with God. I had of course been praying to God and having those fly by prayers, excuse me, but I hadn't actually been building an intentional relationship with him. I didn't really know who I was. And so 11 years ago, after reaching rock bottom, God called me. That was when I realized for the first time that God was calling me, that he was calling me into himself to know him better and to know myself better. And so that started the beginning of my journey of just doing it, of answering the call. As I've been now journeying with God over the past 11 years plus, I realized that there are different phases and stages to being called by God. And so I want to talk about my process. I also want to acknowledge that I am 31 years old. So there are different phases that may arise later in my life that I've not yet come to. But so far, I want to share what I found to be the phases of being called and kind of what I've experienced throughout this process. So the first phase is much like many people say when we're dating. It's like that honeymoon phase, that when we have all this zeal and enthusiasm about being called, about God speaking to us and showing us this new way of being, this new way of living, and it feels good. We feel hopeful and excited and fueled. We feel empowered, like we can do anything. And oftentimes what happened to me is when God called me, he began to reveal giftings in me. He began to speak to me about what he's placed inside of me and how he wanted me to utilize what he's placed inside of me for the purpose of bringing people closer to him. And so for me, that was speaking and writing. He immediately told me that I was to write a book about my life. And he told me that I would be the voice for those who do not know how to speak. And by way of my testimony, I would help people find healing in their own lives and bring them closer to him. So when he called me, he showed me how he wanted to use me for the purpose of bringing people closer to him. And so from there, I felt so empowered. I felt so ready. And I just began to plan and move according to what God was revealing to me. But then what ended up happening is a year or so later, reality began to set in. And I started to see that being called by God didn't mean that my life would just be easy breezy and it would just be a walk in the park. I know so many of us come to God and we think that once we give him our yes and once we answer the call, that we're just going to be floating on clouds, sunshine, and rainbow. And that's not always the case. That is not always the case. And quite often we'll see more roadblocks because the enemy doesn't want us to operate in the function of the kingdom and in knowing who we are in God. So after that honeymoon phase, like a year or so later, reality began to set in and stuff started to come up, like roadblocks, and they didn't feel good, but I still had enough fuel and enough faith and enough hope in that particular phase of my life that I was like, I see this stuff coming up, but I believe God. I trust God enough that I'm going to press anyway. I'm going to push forward anyway with what he's revealed to me. And the fact that he's called me and shown certain things to me, I'm going to stand on that and keep moving. So I had my why and the higher calling in mind. I realized that there was a higher calling and I kept that at the forefront of my mind as I moved forward in life. And then after a while, so some years later, this next phase, after a while, after I had been giving my walking with God my all, um, I realized that I kept taking strides, but then I felt like I kept getting knocked back down, blow after blow after blow. And I started to question the calling. I can't even say that I started to question the calling, but I really started to question if I was called by God to operate in certain ways and to be a certain way. And I started to question the ways in which he showed me, the ways that he revealed I was supposed to show up in the world and shed light in dark places. I started to question that he would actually use me in that way. Like maybe I was imagining these things on my own, or maybe what I was seeing was too big to be true. And so after a while of trying and trying to give it my all, and let's be honest, because sometimes we try to manipulate what God is telling us to do to make it fit how we feel like we're supposed to show up. And so after a while of trying to go after the things that he told me to do and trying to do it his way and trying to put my own little spin on things, I started to say, okay, how can I do something else or add this to it? Because I started to doubt that I was actually called to do the things in the way that God spoke to me that I was called to do them. And so I started to say, okay, I could do this and kind of add this to this and do that. And it became frustrating because those things were not satisfying. They were not fulfilling. They were not working out the way that I felt like they should work out. And so I tried at moments to walk away from the calling of God. I tried to walk away from the things that he told me I was supposed to do. And I just found myself in a place of not being happy. How I got to this place where I am right now today of having this conversation, starting change chats, is that I finally realized I am now at the phase of my calling or being called by God where I've made the decision to refocus and to stay committed. I've realized that God calling me and deciding to use me in certain ways is bigger than me and it's bigger than I think. So now I'm at the place where I'm deciding that even the things that I don't want to do, that I know I'm supposed to do, that I know I'm called to, I am going to commit and give them my all because it's bigger than me. It's bigger than how I feel. So, although the process may not feel good, it may not be easy at all times, I've come to the place where I now realize that just doing it and sticking with the call of God is the very thing that unlocks a sense of fulfillment that we often look for outside of the calling. So I told you all in the last phase, after a while and trying to do things, blah, 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 and go this route and go that route, and things weren't working, I started to try to find fulfillment outside of the calling. But now I'm at that phase of making a decision to stay and commit because I realize I will never find fulfillment outside of the calling. It's only in the calling, walking with God, doing what he's called me to do, that I'm going to see that fulfillment and that I'm going to see that greater benefit of giving it my all in my relationships, attached to God's purpose for my life, and building legacy for those to come after me. That's where I am. And starting this podcast was not easy. It's been on my heart for quite some time, but I had to get to this phase now of being committed. And honestly, when I decided to do this episode, I wasn't all excited. I cried about it. I was scared. I was nervous, but again, I know that it's bigger than me. And I realize that sometimes we sit with things and we don't talk about things and we don't share things and we let things bottle up and we feel like we're the only ones going through things. And so I created this platform to talk about the things that often prevent us from living free, from living in our God-given callings and fulfilling his purpose for our lives. We stay trapped in silence. And so Change Chats is all about having the conversations that we don't have about the things that typically keep us stuck, that God wants us to be free from. I want to kind of go through some things related to us just doing it, just saying yes to the call of God and staying committed to the call of God. Some things that I found in my own journey and that as I was preparing for this that God revealed to me. So the first thing is that the weight of the call will always be heavier and more powerful than any reason not to answer it. So when God calls us to him, the weight of answering that call will always be heavier and more powerful than not answering it. And we can come up with a million reasons why we don't answer it, like we're waiting for it to be the right time, waiting to get ourselves together, waiting until we feel whatever way, waiting until we have a support system, until we are no longer afraid, until we have what we need. But by the time you reach that last stage that I talked about where you make a decision to refocus and stay, it is because you will have experienced that the weight and the power of the call negates every excuse that I just listed. The weight of the call negates every fear, negates every obstacle, negates the lack of support that you feel like you have. Because if you have God and you're answering the call of God, you have everything that you need. The second thing that I found when just doing it and answering the call is that the power of answering and committing to the call of God is that it empowers you to overcome obstacles that weighed you down before you decided to just do it. Let me repeat that. The power in answering and committing to the call of God is that it empowers you to overcome obstacles that weighed you down before you decided to just do it. So, like I said in the beginning, it's not that when you answer the call of God, obstacles won't arise, because they absolutely will. But it's that when you are walking in your calling, God will give you the strength and the confidence and the courage to confront and overcome every obstacle that you face. When you answer and commit to the call of God, He gives you the strength, the confidence, and courage to confront and overcome every obstacle that comes your way, a power that you do not execute, that you do not possess outside of just answering the call. The third thing I found is that we often answer and operate in the call on our lives well before others catch wind of it. This is something that I cried when God spoke to me. This is something that is so important that we really need to realize. I want to say it again. We often answer and operate in the call for our lives well before others catch wind of it. And so many of us are looking for support from others and using that as an excuse not to answer the call of God or to walk away from the call of God. But the truth is, when God calls you and when you commit to Him and when you decide that you're going to allow Him to lead you, you're often operating in that call well before anyone else catches wind of it. Or people might look at you and say you're being funny. Now you're acting funny. You're doing this, you're doing that. They don't realize that you're operating in the call of God. They don't catch wind of it until well after you've already been operating in it. And so the fruit that you're operating in the call of God is not always whether or not people are supporting you. The fruit validates the call, and that often the fruit that happens when we are walking in the call of God is that it often changes us to be better people from the inside first. So when you are saying yes to God, when you draw near to Him, when you allow Him to change your mind and change your heart, it's changing you from the inside. It happens, it's an inner work first. And it also brings you closer to God. So He's changing you and bringing you closer to Him and really showing you who He is and showing you who you are. And then it helps you in your relationships, the relationships that you have with other people. It helps you to learn how to approach those relationships, how to heal, how to mend those relationships. And it also creates impactful legacy. It creates an impactful legacy, and it allows you to build things that will last and not temporal things or things that will fade and once you die will no longer exist. The fourth point is that the microwavable version of success is not the standard or the prototype. Social media, society, all of these things that we have today, mainstream media makes us believe that success is instantaneous, that it happens. And if it's not happening like that for us, then we're doing something wrong. So many of us are on the verge or have been on the verge of abandoning the calling on our lives because we are weighing our success against what seems to be instant success for other people. But we don't know them people. We don't know what they've been through. We don't know how they got to where they got to. We don't know if they're glorifying God with the success that they seem to have. We don't know. So the microwavable version of success is not the standard or the protocol. You weigh your success against what God tells you about your life, what He tells you you're supposed to be. Let Him define what success looks like for you, and do not weigh it against what seems to be instant success for other people. Another point is that some of us are not willing to just do it, whatever it is that God is calling us to, because we're triggered by the outcome we got from doing things that we were not called to do. Or we thought that things we were called to for seasons were meant to last longer. So I want to repeat this because this was another one that broke me down when God spoke it to me. It says that some of us are not willing to just do it, to answer the call of God, because we're triggered by the outcome we got from doing things we weren't called to do. Let's be real. Let's keep it real. Or doing things that were only meant to last for a season that we thought were meant to last longer. So maybe you gave your all to something and in the end it didn't turn out the way that you thought it should. Let's be honest. Many of us operate in our own strength, trying to figure out and forge a path for ourselves. And so the outcomes that often come from us doing that are not ones that satisfy us. They don't feel good. They feel like we've maybe failed. And so when God calls us, oftentimes we're afraid or we make up excuses because we're weighing that call against the things that we did on our own. Or maybe God told us to do something and it was supposed to be for a season. And when that season ended, it felt like a failure. And so because we misinterpreted what God was calling us to and how long he was calling us to it, now our hope is deferred and we're afraid to approach this thing that he's calling us to now because of how we defined what he called us to for a season. God wants to help us be free from what we think we know. Answering the call is really about relinquishing trust and allowing God to define what life looks like for us. The sixth point is that your calling allows you to be the answer to a problem that's been plaguing you. When I say that's so true, your calling allows you to be an answer to something that's been plaguing you. So maybe it's that you're seeing people operate in a certain function or do a certain thing and it's really been bothering you or agitating you. Or maybe it's something that has been like a thorn in your side your entire life that seems unfair, that seems like it wasn't right. You've not done anything to deserve it. But what you may not realize is that whatever the problem is that's out there that keeps bothering you, you may be the answer to it. God may be calling you to be the very person, the very solution to that problem. So keep your mind open to God and however he wants to use you and reveal things to you. Because while you're looking for the answer out here, he may be creating the answer in here inside of you. Don't underplay, downplay, shortchange yourself. You are powerful. God created you in his image and his likeness, and you are the answer to a problem that the world has. And that's on that. That's that on that. And then the last point that I wanted to make and how we what things look like when we're operating in the call of God is that you will never reap the full benefit of just doing it if when things get hard or go in a direction you didn't anticipate, you give up. So that's why I said that last phase of operating in the calling where you make the decision to refocus and to stay and to remain because you know it's bigger than you, even when it doesn't feel good and even when you want to cry and when you want to give up, you stay because you know it's bigger than you think. You don't give up before you see the harvest. You don't give up before you see the page turn and you see God work things together and make it easier for you to understand. Because if God has called you to it, you have to do it. And you have to know and believe that he's made provisions for you related to however he's called you to operate and function in the world. So you may not see it, but answering the call to come closer to God, he reveals and he shows you that you're equipped and he shows you how to operate and function and flow. But if you give up, if you abort the calling, if you forsake the calling before you really get to see the page turn, then it will all be for nothing. So you'll never reap the full benefit of just doing it if you give up before the harvest. I have some points regarding how we know that God is calling us to do it in the first place. The first point is that the driving force behind God calling you is to serve people more than to benefit yourself. To serve people more than to benefit yourself. The second point that doing it shines a light in dark places. When you answer the call of God and you operate in whatever function or capacity he's calling you to operate in, it's always going to shine a light in a dark place. Also, answering the call brings you closer to God, as I said before, making you better and healing you and growing you. It also points people to God and not you. So many of us have made idols and began to come into covenant with people because a lot of us are pointing people to ourselves and not to God. But when we're operating in the call of God, it's always going to point people to God and not to us. It would also align with the word of God. So when God is speaking to you or calling you to do something, or when you're operating in a certain function, this is why it's so important that we read our word, because God's calling will always align with his word. It also causes you to operate with the power, authority, and conviction that is not present otherwise. So when we answer the call, there is a sort of like strength and empowerment and a light that we take on that will never show up outside of us answering the call of God. You also know that God is calling you to do it because it causes you to count the cost, sacrifice, and to be accountable. So again, we can look at the picture and say that this is hard. Man, this is what I'm doing right now is hard. It's not easy. I love to do this, but it's not easy because of what I said before when we're looking to other people and what does success look like and measuring our success against how people are supporting us. It makes it difficult for us to operate in the flow of God. But I've counted the cost this time, and I'm willing to sacrifice and be accountable to the call and to operate in the ways that God is calling me to, because I know that this is what he's calling me to. You know that God is calling you to do it because it seems too big to be true and like you can't do it on your own. God's calling is absolutely too big to be true. The way that he's calling you to function in the world and what he's calling you to do, it should look too big to be true because you can't do it by yourself. You need him and you need the resources that he will provide for you. It's not just another thing you're doing for sport, but it feels like option A and only. What I'm doing right now, the way in which I feel like God has called me to speak and write and empower people through my words, this feels like my only option. So I work a 9 to 5 and I'm committed to that, but I feel like that's a means to an end because I feel like God calling me, he's calling me to operate in this capacity, and this is how I shine my light in dark places. And so this feels like option A and only. You should also feel multi-generational blessings attached to doing whatever God is calling you to do. That's legacy building. You should feel the tug to build a legacy and to create multi-generational blessings. It's also the thing that you can't seem to shake, that you think about often, and when other things come up, you're still thinking about however God is calling you to function and operate. And when you go off track and you try to walk away from it because it seems hard and you don't know how to do it and it doesn't seem like it's successful, you feel like you're failing. It's the thing that you always find yourself back at, that place, that same place, thinking and dreaming about doing whatever it is that God is calling you to do. So, what do we do when we're faced with obstacles in answering the call? Number one, we got to turn to Jesus. Let's just be honest. I was like, how can I not make this podcast seem so stiff and like I'm just talking about God all the time? I can't, because just doing it is absolutely about answering the call of God. And how can I talk about answering the call of God lest I talk about God and his role in the big picture of this thing? So what do I do when faced with obstacles in answering the call? Number one, turn to Jesus through prayer. Be specific in your prayers. If you feel like there's an area that you're tripping up on, be specific about that thing. Ask God for clarity. Read the word. Journaling has helped me so much. And then it's also important, as you're building a relationship with God, the word tells us not to be conformed to the ways of the world, but to be transformed by the renewing of our minds so that we may know what is the perfect will for God concerning our lives. And so we need to change our perspective. We need to change our perspective and remember that hard doesn't mean it's not supposed to happen. Perspective change, renewing our minds. The third point is to remember why you answered the call in the first place. So when obstacles come up, remember why you said yes to God, why you decided to live for God, why you decided to journey with God in the first place, and let that be the thing that helps you to keep going. You also need to give yourself grace. This is a big point for me. It's about progress, not perfection. And also, what is perfection anyway? We are not perfect outside of God. And the word tells us that God is the author. I'm sorry, I'm talking about some author. What? Anyway, God is the author and perfecter of our faith. So he is perfecting us. He is perfecting us until the day of Jesus. He is completing and perfecting us. So he's making us perfect day by day as we answer the call. And then understand that you're doing it in God's strength, not your own. So again, he's perfecting us. He's doing the work. So as we walk with him, journey with him, and trust in him, know that he's going to guide us and help us. And then we also need to ask for and utilize help. God will provide help for us, but we can't have too much pride or let our ego get in the way or whatever it is, feel like we're not sufficient enough to even ask for help. We need to ask for and utilize the help that God gives us. And then lastly, be patient. Every harvest has to, before it becomes a harvest, it has to undergo a process. Seeds have to be planted. Things have to be watered before we see a harvest. So we have to be patient with every season and every stage of lives and with ourselves. I told you all to think about the thing that you should put in your mind as far as what your calling is or the part of your calling, and to carry that with you as we dove into today's topic, which was just do it. And I want you to remember, right? This is episode 1 of season 1, but this podcast is called Change Chats. So there has to always be a change that is inspired from the chat that we have. We just had the chat. So now what change has to come about from this? I am challenging you to pull out a journal or some paper. And even if you don't do it right now, come back and replay this episode. Come back and listen to this and pull out a journal or a piece of paper and ask yourself, am I ready to just do it? Am I ready to answer the call of God? Write that down. Think about it. Be honest with yourself. Pray about it. And then if the answer is no, I want you to ask yourself, why not? Speak that with God. Ask God to help you see why you're not ready to answer the call. What's holding you back? What obstacles are presenting themselves? And then from there, write down, ask yourself, what needs to happen for you to be ready to answer the call? What needs to happen? What things do you need to grab a hold of? What truth do you need to grab a hold of? What do you need to let God do inside of you in order to be ready to answer the call? So pray and ask God to help you know what needs to happen, and then commit to taking the steps. I'm going to challenge you, after you write down in your journal or on your piece of paper these things that I just presented to you, and once you have prayed and asked God to help you, and once you decide what needs to happen for you to be ready to answer the call, I want you to commit to taking the steps every day for the next 30 days. Whatever God reveals, as you say, what do I need to do? What do I need to do if I'm not ready to answer the call? As God reveals what you need to do, commit to taking those steps every day for 30 days and watch what it does for your life. And then if you say, yes, I'm ready to answer the call, or I'm operating in the call, I want you to pay close attention to what's happening and what you're doing when you feel most empowered and like you have the most strength and the confidence and courage as you are answering the call of God. What are you doing? Are you trusting God fully? Are you waking up in the morning, committing yourself to God? Are you utilizing your village? Are you reading books and listening to podcasts like this? What are you doing, and how are you staying encouraged as you answer the call of God and as you operate in the capacity that God is calling you to? The second thing that I want everybody to do is to share this with someone you believe can benefit from hearing this word, from hearing this message, and then pray for them. Commit to praying for them. Share it with them, and maybe their hearts are not ready to receive it. Maybe their hearts are ready to receive it. Whatever the case, share it. Don't let fear stop you from sharing it with them. Don't let fear of being too deep stop you from sharing it with them. Share it with them, and then pray for them. Pray for the ground of their hearts. Pray that something within this episode is going to help them to even be curious about the call of God for their lives, and then to pray and to seek God to open the door for them to begin to journey with him. And then lastly, to my viewing audience, I'd like you to leave in the comments what stuck out most to you, What stuck out most to you in this episode? What is something that really just stuck that you caught and that you want to keep as you move on in life? And then be sure to like and subscribe. This is a new podcast, new to my YouTube channel. So make sure that you like and subscribe and share it with everybody that you know. So I'll close with this quote by Frederick Buckner. I don't know if his last name is pronounced correctly, but it says, "The place God calls you to is the place where your deep gladness and the world's deep hunger meets." The place God calls you to is the place where your deep gladness and the world's deep hunger meets. So, change makers, let's change the game. We got this. I love y'all. Let's keep talking about it. And I'll see y'all next time. Peace.